listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Happy Friday and welcome to The Briefing. Guy Sebastian, Shannon Knoll, Casey Donovan. They're all household names, and there's one show that made that happen. But behind the instant fame is a machine that's still trying to pump out stars.
It's all about control. It's all about having complete control of the narrative that the TV show, the network, the record label want this artist to be perceived as. And the good thing about doing this with a lot of these artists 10 years on is those contracts have finally expired.
That chat looking into the secret formula that powers music reality TV shows and why they've stopped creating stars is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Friday, the 16th of May.
Good morning, Chris, and to you listening. Kicking off this Friday with some, bad news for the hip pocket. Over a third of homes in Australia now cost at least $1 million compared to just under 10% a decade ago. The research from Cotality found $1 million or over is now a pretty standard price for housing in Australia, where the median values of properties, in our capital cities at least, has surpassed that price tag already. 42% or $1 million or more. And since 2015, the kind of home $1 million buys you has also changed dramatically.
Yeah, and I know that we led this headline saying that it's bad news for the hip pocket, mine and yours, Tara, but for homeowners, I mean, this is great news. Like, for example, in Greater Sydney, about 10 years ago, only 5-bedroom homes would have a median value of about $1 million. Now it would be more like $2 million for those same homes. And in terms of which capital cities fared the highest, well, we've heard it before, and bad news again for us, Tara. Sydney, we lead the charge as per usual with 64% of our homes over that $1 million price tag, followed by 40% in Brisbane. Over 30% of Melbourne, high 20s for Adelaide and Perth, nearly 12% in Hobart, and just 1.3% in Darwin. And I mean, honestly, if ever you needed a reason to pack up and head up north, I mean, this is the reason.
The new Greens leader, Larissa Waters, says she wants to bring the party back to its original roots with more of a focus on the environment again and the daily needs of Aussies.
People elected us to get shit done, and that's what we intend to do in the service of people and the planet.
Back in 2010, Waters was the first person ever to be elected to the Greens in Queensland, and yesterday was unanimously chosen as the party's 5th ever federal leader. She says the Greens will have heart, continue fighting on women's rights and inequality issues, and it'll stand strong on its stance on Gaza and housing.
Yeah, Senator Maureen Faruqi, who was one of those frontrunners as well, who we were discussing yesterday as the potential to be part of what was being called the Greens thruple. Well, she's been elected the party's new deputy, which is welcome news for a lot of Greens supporters. And as to the Greens' new portfolio, so who will be the spokesperson for what, we're expecting that to be selected ahead of Parley's return in a couple of weeks' time. So stay tuned for those announcements. Meantime, there's been less celebrating and more stewing for the coalition, who are at loggerheads right now over the party's future. New Liberal leader Susan Lee says it'll take some time for the Libs and Nationals to figure out a new agreement between the parties amid talks for a push to axe their net zero policies. She met with Nats leader David Littleproud yesterday to discuss portfolios and says progress is happening slowly but surely.
Yeah, and just briefly while we're on politics and what our leaders are all doing, our PM Anthony Albanese is leaving Indonesia to head for Rome today so he can be at the Pope's inauguration, where he's expected to meet with a number of world leaders after his big election win. And he'll attend Pope Leo XIV's inauguration at the Vatican on Sunday, along with an expected hundreds of thousands of spectators.
To the Middle East now, where Donald Trump says he wants the US to take control of Gaza and turn it into a freedom zone. The comments come as overnight Israeli bombardment has killed more than 100 people in Gaza, including women and children, mostly in the city's south.
The latest wave of strikes comes as Gazans today commemorate 77 years since the Palestinian Nakba, or catastrophe, the result of the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, when the State of Israel was created, a period where around 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forced from their homes.
What we're experiencing now is even worse than the Nakba of 1948. We've suffered massacres, hunger, killing, and repeated displacement. Now, the Israeli military urges us to move to the western part of Gaza, claiming it's a safe zone. But the reality is that we're attacked no matter where we go.
That translation thanks to the BBC. Meantime, the US president, who's almost completed his 4-day tour of the Middle East, has been asked whether he was disappointed that Vladimir Putin wasn't going to show up to scheduled peace talks with Ukraine in Turkey.
I'm not disappointed in anything. What would I be We just took in $4 trillion, and he says, are you disappointed about a delegation? Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together, but we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
As for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he's also withdrawn from attending the talks in Istanbul, sending his defense minister instead. Zelensky this morning accusing Putin of being not serious about peace after the Russian president sent a junior delegation to what would have been the first direct talks between the two nations since the beginning of the war 3 years ago.
Australia and other neighbouring countries of Papua New Guinea are at risk, according to the World Health Organization, after it recorded its first polio outbreak in the country in 7 years. 2 children have been diagnosed with the infectious disease, getting it through community transmission in the city of Lae, with samples also detected in Port Moresby.
Polio is spread through contaminated food, water or hands passed on by an infected person's saliva or feces. And while some people show no symptoms or others get some similar to the flu, 1 in 200 are permanently paralysed. The WHO has expressed deep concern and says it poses a serious risk to young children, and the focus will now be on getting people vaccinated, especially kids under the age of 5.
Yeah, and that's because less than 50% of the population is vaccinated in PNG, and our Department of Foreign Affairs says Australia is helping. It's providing its support to Papua New Guinea at the moment.
To sport now, where I'm going to be offering my commiserations, Tara Cassidy. New South Wales has secured the Women's Origin Series with a dominant 26-6 win over Queensland in Sydney last night.
Okay. Well, at least one of your State of Origin sides can win them for you then. Queensland, 24 wins to 17 in the men's. I'll just quickly remind you. Anyway, well done, ladies. Back to the story.
Shots fired. Look, more than 16,000 fans braved the heavy rain to watch the Blues seal the deal last night, putting the New South Wales side in a pretty solid spot to claim their first ever whitewash or clean sweep in Game 3, which will be in Newcastle at the end of this month.
Australia, we hope you are drinking a spearmint milkshake. It's Gojo's favourite. Here he is, our milkshake man. Take it away, Australia!
And it's happened. Australia has just opened Eurovision Semi Final 2 at the time of recording, and by the time you're listening to this, the semi-final might have wrapped up, and fingers crossed we are through to Sunday's grand final, Chris. I know you'll be watching.
Oh yes, I will absolutely be watching, and honestly, why shouldn't we qualify? We had a massive blender on stage, multiple outfit changes, gyrating hips, and a shirtless Gojo. I mean, what more could you ask for?
I'm so proud.
That is how you open semi-final 2, Australia.
Oh, well done.
Yes, some very exciting stuff. And hey, if you want to learn more about Gojo and Milkshake Man, all about the song, I spoke to him a few months ago. I'm going to put that link in the description. It is definitely worth a listen ahead of Sunday's grand final. I am urging you, Tara Cassidy, our Eurovision hater, or our Eurovision skeptic, to go and listen to that one. That brings our headlines to a close. Coming up next is my deep dive, looking into the dark side of reality music TV and why it's no longer making stars. Have a listen to that up next. Let's take a little trip down memory lane and visit the first ever season of Australian Idol.
The winner of Australian Idol 2003 is Guy Sebastian.
Yes, Guy Sebastian, still a household name in 2025. But what if I asked you to name me the most recent winner of Idol? Yeah, don't worry, I couldn't do it either. But there was a time that tellies right across this country were lit up with shows like Idol, X Factor and The Voice, promising to turn everyday Australians into superstars. Think people like Casey Donovan, Rob Mills and Dami Im. Now, Nick Kelly is a former record label exec and co-host of national radio show The Hot Hits. He's also the host of Listener's new podcast, The Moment It Changed Touchdown, that's pulling back the curtain on Australian music reality TV to find out why, year after year, these shows have pumped out winners that most of the times just fade into oblivion.
I dare you to go on a show like Australian Idol and come out the other side with your mind and your heart and your soul still intact.
They picked roadkill as well. They were very good at finding roadkill.
I'd probably tell her, you're right, walk the off that stage.
Because there's a lot of people who can sing and ultimately, who gives a
Nick, welcome to the briefing. Why, in your opinion, haven't music reality TV shows like The Voice and Idol produced a household name in recent memory?
There are a number of factors to this, and we uncover this a lot in The Moment It Changed Touchdown, the podcast. One of those factors is the fact there is just so many ways to be a star these days, and so many ways to cut through as a musician. Or not cut through, because it is so fractured now. You think back to when Shannon Noll and Guy Sebastian were stood on the front steps of the Sydney Opera House in 2003, and the amount of eyeballs that were on that show, because there was no distraction. You didn't have people on their second screen watching something else on TikTok.
Yeah.
You had everyone glued to Australian Idol. So you had much more of a chance for these kind of artists to cut through when these shows were in their initial phases. What's happened since is artists have found a way to connect directly with fans rather than require the conduit of something like a reality TV show to connect to new fans and find new audiences. So these shows have the role of these shows has kind of really changed very rapidly over the last 10 to 15 years.
So to oversimplify it, it's literally a saturation issue.
It is a saturation issue, yeah. And the fact that these shows have remained on the air and some of them have beefed up their budgets since to try and claw back some of that audience. And also the fact that the audiences actually haven't declined enormously for these shows. The Voice still rates really, really well comparatively to where TV audiences are in total at the moment. The Voice is still rating really significantly. Australian Idol doesn't rate too badly either. There is still an appetite for the drama in these shows, but the conversion to making a superstar with a long-term career, which is something that seems to have vanished.
Well, speaking of this project, you've been a part of the Australian music industry for over a decade now. Was there anything that was uncovered in the series that shocked you?
I knew these stories, they were kind of open secrets, a lot of them. What did shock me was the honesty we got out of the folks we talked to. And there are some pretty high-profile people in here. Casey Donovan speaks to us. Dami Im speaks to us quite extensively about a really tumultuous experience working particularly with the record label that she was contractually obligated to sign to. So she signs this contract before the show even starts, and it requires her, if Sony Music want to pick her up, she has to sign with them for a multi-album deal. And the way that unraveled when she ended up going with them, releasing her first music, having some success initially in Australia and in Korea as well, and then it all kind of decays from there. And I think that was the sad thing for me that I didn't want to uncover, was the decay in these artists' mental health, the decay in these artists' careers, in their trust in themselves as a musician, that the things that the show is a catalyst for, signing a record deal, releasing records, those things really started to get away from what the artist actually wanted to be doing with their life. And yeah, you've got people like Rob Mills talking, Casey Donovan, Katie Underwood of Bardot, you know, back to pop stars in the 90s, which for some of your younger listeners, they may not be aware of that. But the core of their stories and the fact that this was like it was didn't really shock me. Another thing that shocked me was having the judges and executive producer of Australian Idol, Stephen Tate, is featured extensively in the show and talks about the fact that they really felt like they had to keep in the bad singers and, you know, really showed that this was a entertainment show more than it was an actual catalyst to break superstars.
Yeah. Well, I do want to touch on Dami Im for a second longer. I know she features quite heavily in the series and we hear from her first-person account. There's a moment there where she's talking about 2016, which for anyone who's unfamiliar with is ultimately the height of Dami Im's career. She's done Eurovision, she's placed second, which is like historic for Australia, but also Eurovision creates like global stars. Her record label didn't capitalise on that in the slightest, and that was something that she was quite disappointed in.
Yeah, 100%. And they almost forced her to do an album of covers of songs by the Carpenters rather than releasing and designing original material that was more true to her. And she'd had some fantastic success working with a songwriting duo called DNA and had a couple of big hits, including her song Super Love, which is an anthem for the ages. And they really kind of went away from that and went towards this more adult contemporary lane and tried to kind of just make these familiar songs that were easily digestible and easily churned out. What was also going on at the time, which we get into in the podcast, was a systemic issue with the culture at that record label at the time, which has since been kind of moved forward, and knowing what that record label's like now, it's a distant memory. But at the time, there was a lot of pressure inside that record label for someone like Dami to make them as much money as possible in the shortest space of time possible. And they thought doing covers of the Carpenters was the way to go with that, instead of, you're right, capitalising on a global moment and thinking about what she now meant to so many people.
Yeah, well, a central theme throughout this whole podcast is honestly the power of the higher-ups, whether it be the record labels, whether it be the production team behind these shows. We hear about several contracts. We hear about contracts that start before the shows start filming. We hear about contracts that last well until after these contestants have finished on the shows. What can you tell us about those contracts and essentially what role they played in the lives of these artists and the way that they were packaged and sold to Australia?
You understand why they have to sign these contracts. It's all about control. It's all about having complete control of the narrative that the TV show, the network, the record label want this artist to be perceived as. And that has to start very early on. So they get complete control of the narrative that's told on the show, the way they're positioned as an artist, and complete control of what they're allowed to say and not say as the show ends. And the good thing about doing this with a lot of these artists 10 years on is those contracts have finally expired. But what I think was, I'll leave people to actually listen to the podcast to understand it's too deep to go into in this conversation, but there were a number of layers of contracting involved that if you didn't sign, that you just weren't on the show. And a lot of these people have made this active choice to chase this fame or this moment for themselves. Sometimes it's a reclamation of their own identity. You've got to sign the contract if you want to appear on the show. What I find really interesting is the fact that in 2024, that contract that requires you to join that record label if you win, or even if you're in the top 12, if you appear on the show at all, they can exercise an option to sign you to a record label. That's now gone. So I think that's a really healthy step, and that's what really kind of makes me happy about where these shows maybe are going, is it's actually a cash prize now on shows like The Voice and Australian Idol. I believe it's $100,000 on Idol now, and you just get that. And you're not required to sign to a record label. There's still contractual obligations with the network and the production company, but no contractual obligations with a record label. So you get to use that money to produce the music you want, take the time to find the right record label, the right manager, the right artist team around you that helps you actually build a sustainable career and release the kind of music you want. We didn't get it right 20 years ago. And even 10 years ago. And there are still elements of now that we don't have it right. But there is an understanding now that forcing someone to sign to a record label they're maybe not the right fit for does not help anyone. No one wins there. Production company, record label, artist, no one wins. Giving them that cash prize and giving them the platform of a national TV show maybe helps them actually build a career. The only problem is there is also this kind of cringe factor around these shows as well. As good as they are, as much as they rate, it's hard to become a cool, credible, alternative artist if you want to become one. by appearing on one of these shiny floor, Scott Tweedy microphone in hand kind of shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's stick with the positives. Like you kind of mentioned there, the people have been able to build their careers, and these shows ultimately have changed a lot of lives, and sometimes for the better. From Australian Idol to The Voice, what can you tell us about this side of the story? What can you tell us about the positive side of this story?
Every artist that we spoke to on this show, despite how bad some of their experiences at the time had been, no one regretted going on the show. Everyone was grateful for what they learned from doing it, because the resilience some of these people had to learn. And there's people like Carissa Eden, who at the time was a household name. She matched a record only held by the Beatles on the charts at that point. And she even was grateful, and she had to go through it. There's an artist named Bella Ferraro that we talked to as well, who, again, household name for a couple of months there. Grateful for the experience because she knows how to navigate these things now. And I think that's what I liked about this, is it became a lesson of resilience for a lot of these people, and a lesson of how to navigate the music industry. I think the music industry is heading into a much healthier place, and, you know, I'm around it just as much as I was 10 years ago. The people that make the decisions, the people that are finding the artists are looking more broadly, looking with more of an open mind and thinking in a more mentally healthy kind of way as well. And that's what makes me excited about the future of not only the music industry, but these shows too, is that we're gone from the days of, I think people's bullshit detectors are much higher than they were before.
Yeah.
So a lot of the manufacturing of kind of the controversial moments on these shows, and you hear the judges talk about, you know, being essentially told to ham it up, they're gone.
Yeah.
And I'm really hopeful that these shows are creating a much healthier environment in the future, and that the artists that don't need these shows and manage to do this on their own terms are doing it in a much healthier way as well.
Well, Nick Kelly, thank you so much for joining us once again on The Briefing. We will all be listening. The link to this new podcast series that you are hosting is in the description, so everyone get around it right now.
Thanks, Chris.
That was Nick Kelly speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. It's a really easy way you can support us and all that we do here at The Briefing. So we're sharing our socials. Check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And don't forget, we'll be back with a brand new episode in your feeds this afternoon, hosted by Natasha Belling. And tomorrow, Antoinette Latouf will be here for another episode of The Weekend Briefing. I'm Chris Biru. Catch you next time.
Listener.